The broadcast is now starting.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, welcome to another episode of the PixelMill Webinar Series. Today we offer Use Office UI Fabric to Beautify SharePoint. My name is Michael Wells. I am the Partnerships and Community Manager here at PixelMill, and I am just so happy to have you guys here with us today. A couple quick housekeeping things, the usual stuff. If you guys have any questions at all, there is a questions tab for you. Please send those to us anytime during the webinar, and we will try to get those to Eric as quickly as we can. If for some reason we don't get to those throughout the session, there is a 15-minute Q&A period at the end where Eric will answer any and all questions that you could have and whatnot. Without further ado, I'll stop talking. All the way from across the pond in London, it's Eric Overfield. Take it away.
All right, thank you. Hey, so I'm out here and I'm kind of thinking, back when I was like 3 years old at preschool, what too many years ago for us to think about. I mean, I loved finger painting, and my mom said that, I was like the next Picasso. Well, at least my mom told me, and I kind of believed her. I'm like, cool, right? So here I'm this little 3-year-old, and I would like put all this paint on my hand, and I'd put my hand on the piece of paper, and I'd be like, hey, look at this cool art, and then I'd turn it into a turkey or something, and people are like, oh, isn't that cute? So I'm like, oh yeah, I'm going to be the greatest artist ever. I'm going to be this, what do you want to be to grow up? I'm going to be the next Picasso. And that didn't quite work out. I kind of went the other way. I decided I was much more my mom. I was much more of a programmer, much more of a developer. And so I kind of left that artwork behind. And now I could always create reasonably good web designs. I mean, I was okay. I wasn't really an artist, but I could do some good work, and I could implement it really, really well. But it would have been really nice, like if there were some cool tools that would help me build good-looking sites without having to worry so much about the art. And definitely when that came into the SharePoint world, dealing with design in SharePoint, and really not supposed to be able to, you're not supposed to be touching too much of design in SharePoint. It would sure be really cool if there was a way to like not have to worry so much about the design. Instead, I can focus on the code, shall I say, so that I could still make like a really good looking site or really good looking implementation or really good looking add-on within SharePoint. But still, like, I just didn't have to think about the design. I could just say, hey, make this look like a SharePoint button, or make this look like an Office panel, or make this look like a call out, just like I see throughout the entire SharePoint platform. And that's why we're here today, because that exists, that Microsoft has created that. It's called Office UI Fabric. And I think we're going to have a really good time here over the next hour to learn about what UI Fabric is and how we can use it. For you devs on the call or listening in post to this webinar, this is going to definitely be for you. We're going to look at a lot of code. In fact, the demos that I'm going to go over are already available in the lower right hand of your screen. It's the github.com/eoverfield/the SP Office UI Fabric. So if you want to download the code, there's 4 major demos I'm going to go over. That's the code for you. You're good to go. Anybody, if you want my slide deck, no problem. You want that the pixely/eo Office UI Fabric URL. It is case sensitive, so if you would like this the slide deck, go ahead and download that. Let's see what else. So for you designers on the call or listening in, this is still an important discussion for you to have, because just because you might not be implementing the designs, when you think about how you're going to design interfaces on top of Office 365, SharePoint, SharePoint on-prem, online, etc., you're going to be wanting to think about how to use Fabric UI and make sure that your designs adhere to those standards, because your developers are going to love you. And for you decision makers on the line, you end users, you still definitely want to be here, because you want to help your team focus them on where they're going to be able to leverage these tool sets to move forward and to create those really good interfaces on top of SharePoint and Office that are quick to install and easy to maintain. Okay, so I've been talking for a little bit. Who am I? For those of you who I've not had the pleasure to meet, my name is Eric Overfield, President and co-founder of PixelMill. I'm also a Microsoft MVP, Microsoft Regional Director, an author. I deal a lot with the community. Good ways to find me on my blog, ericoverfield.com, or on Twitter @EricOverfield. Live tweeting is always encouraged, so if you find anything interesting that you learn, hopefully you'll learn at least 3 things here, you'll be good to go. A little bit about PixelMill, for those of you who haven't worked with us yet or haven't looked too much what PixelMill does. We're a digital agency specializing in Office 365 and Azure cloud-based portals, as well as on-prem. We do some fun stuff. Okay, so quick overview. We're going to be looking at Office UI Fabric. my one takeaway, what I want you to take away from this conversation, if anything else, is look at what the UI Fabric is and see how you could use it on your current or future implementations and customizations on top of the SharePoint platform, be it on-prem or on 365. That's what I really want you to try. Now, if you already move one step past that and say, okay, we're going to use this, great. Hopefully I give you some really good information, give you some really good places to get started, and see how you can use it. Okay, so Office UI Fabric. So what is this? What is this all about? So the UI Fabric is designed as a framework for building your own custom interfaces on top of primarily SharePoint or 365, but that adheres to Office 365 standards and SharePoint front-end standards. It is open source, so you can come, and it's maintained by Microsoft, but it's completely open source, so you can take anything that they've done and you could tweak it to match your specific needs. And we're going to look at that on my last demo. We're going to go ahead and see what we could do to make some changes to some implementations they provide, some components they provide. If you want to learn more about Fabric in general, you'll go to dev.office.com/fabric, and we're going to look at that page as well in a second. I did get a quick note. There's potentially a little bit of lag on the audio. This is being recorded, and it will go out on YouTube, as well as we will push this out via email to anybody that registered. So if you want to listen back to this more straight audio, we will have that available for you. They're primary pillars of Office UI Fabric. So there's the core aspect of the Fabric UI, and that's going to be your styles and CSS. That's going to give you the general styling so that your customizations, and I'm just going to kind of make it a little easier on my verbiage here, your customizations on top of SharePoint look like they belong within the SharePoint infrastructure. On top of that, though, there is a JavaScript component which is for interactions, such as if you wanted to have, say, pop-ups, or you wanted callouts, or you wanted panels, things like that. There's some JavaScript components you can use to help you just build them without having to think about all of the extra JavaScript that may be needed. UI Fabric has also been pre-integrated with React, which is another open source library that is maintained by Facebook and is used for creating really good-looking UIs. So Fabric UI and React are already pre-combined together. So if you use React, you can very easily use Fabric, much easier than if you were just trying to use it with raw HTML. Now for those Angular users out there, there is an open source project maintained separately aside from Microsoft combining Angular and UI Fabric. I'm pretty sure that's just Angular 1.1. I don't think that's Angular 2, but it is open source, maintained by the community as a whole. So to me, it's really three primary pillars. It's the core aspect, which is your CSS, your JavaScript, which is the interactions, and React, which is your UI integration. So if we want to look at the UI Fabric itself, in particular, let's start with the core there. You've got your styles. Well, your styles include your typography, the fonts that you use, which is going to be the Sequoia UI font, your sort of default Microsoft font. Fabric also includes a color palette, so a predefined color palette that fits within what Office and SharePoint typically look like, which is really nice because a lot of us aren't great with color, and it can be very difficult to get a color that fits within what Office already provides. UI Fabric already took care of that for us. It does provide its own responsive grid, which is useful and nice. That way we don't have to get like another grid such as Bootstrap. We can just use the grid that Fabric provides if we wanted to have a responsive grid. And then there's even animations included in the styles. If we wanted transitions of our CSS elements, we want something to float in from the left using CSS, we can basically just tell a container, hey, you're a UI Fabric container, and we want you to have this animation, and that animation will occur. Within icons, there's a couple hundred, I believe, different icons included in Fabric that you can easily just use, and these are all included within Fabric, but have simple interactions as well as the official logo. So if you wanted to include such as like a, an Excel document symbol, you can just reference the Fabric UI icon for Excel and you would get a Excel icon right there. Then there are also some different components, such as if you want navigation elements or input containers that were pre-styled to look a certain way. If you wanted people pickers, these are used a lot, or persona cards. There's styles already designed for you. As long as you structure your HTML a certain way or you structure your React a certain way, you can automatically get these really cool designs, which is just so useful as a developer. So now why might we want to go and use Fabric? Well, a lot of reasons. As developers in particular, this is going to help you focus on functionality. I'm a developer. That's what I want to do. I want to develop. I don't want to think about how to get that specific design implemented because it's kind of just painful. Like, let me build the cool interactions. Let me go grab data from the SharePoint REST API or from Graph or something, and let me take that data and put it into a people card. But I don't want to have to focus on how to make the people card look the way the person card look like the rest of the people cards throughout the Office 365 infrastructure. It's just not worth it. So you get this consistency of interface. So if you build a customization or a custom design, you get automatically, in a sense, your customizations look like they belong directly in SharePoint. And for any of you SIs out there, as well as your ISVs, I mean, this just makes your customizations for your clients or for your customers look like they belong directly in SharePoint. They don't stick out at all. Another good aspect of why you'd want to use this is because if you're moving into modern SharePoint development, that being the SharePoint framework, which is all the buzz right now, Fabric is already built in. Like it's already being downloaded by the user, so there's no reason in a sense not to use it because the CSS and the JavaScript and whatnot is already provided to the end user, so might as well use it. Fabric is used by a lot of the Office 365 products, not everything, but it is definitely used by Microsoft, and they do maintain it. So we can quickly go ahead and look at the UI Fabric in action. And the way I'm going to demo this is I'm going to have a little bit of fun with it. The first thing I'm going to do is actually just show it to you without having to use Office at all, without using SharePoint at all. Now, if you download the code base that I provided in my GitHub project, there is a demo scripts.ps1 file. So everything you see in the window at top, you have all of this basically if you want to do it. As I get into some of my future demos here, I'm going to be using the PnP provisioning engine, which I don't really have time to go over here. So I'm going to skip most of it, but we've done a webinar on this as well, so you can go back into our library and you can find out how to use the PnP provisioning to do some really cool stuff. So anyhow, though, I did go ahead and I grabbed a GitHub project here at the top that a gentleman created that shows Office UI Fabric is a whole layout without using any SharePoint, and it was actually really cool. I moved it into this one Fabric in Action folder. So what I need to do here is, if I go into that, I'm actually already running it. Let me run it again. So I'm going to say npm start, which is the documentation provides that. And what's going to happen here is, without even thinking about it, a browser came up and is going to preload a Fabric example. So if you want to see sort of Fabric in action, this is a really good example of it. So what's going on here? Well, we have a pretty cool grid layout. We've got a navigation structure on the left-hand side that's built in Fabric for us. We have this really cool bookmark piece, or breadcrumb piece, excuse me, that's built for us, where if you look at this, files, folder 1, folder 2, folder 3, folder 4, and home, all we'd have to do as a developer is build the HTML structure in a certain way, and we're going to go look at that. And Fabric will style it for us and give us this cool interaction. Same thing with the top menu bar, as well as all these cool input buttons with all of this interaction. All of that is done for us, assuming that we build our HTML structure correctly, and we link to the Fabric CSS and JavaScript correctly. All right, so we'll quickly go and look at that code. And let's see what's going on here. So under source, there's a components folder, and what's happening here, this is all Node.js. Within Node.js, we are including Fabric This is TypeScript effectively, or way to look at it. This isn't TypeScript, but it's close enough to TypeScript, and it is it's using the basic import to import Fabric, and then what we see is kind of this weird HTML-like structure. Well, this is actually React. This is a React component, and what it's doing is it's saying, hey, I want to load up Fabric, and then within Fabric, I want to include a nav bar, I want to have a content box, I want to have a sidebar, and I want to have a footer. Well, all of those components are React components, which can be found in the components folder. So let's go ahead and let's go look at content, because I think this is one of the cool ones here. If we go ahead and we scroll down and we look at one specific piece here, we're going to look at something called breadcrumb. Well, that was that breadcrumb that I showed you. That's the line of code you have to build. I mean, that's it. Like, you can't get much more simple than that. It does need an input, which is the items. The items is breadcrumbs, so there is a list of breadcrumbs that are being pulled down at the bottom. So that breadcrumbs list that I told you about, it's a JSON list, effectively. Okay, so I'm going really deep into code without explaining it. A little too much for us right now, but what's going on here? In general, you set up a data structure. You set up some HTML in a certain way. You give it, if you're using React, it's even easier. You give it some simple stuff, and we'll look at just raw HTML in the next demo. And we don't have to worry about the styling of the interactions. Fabric UI does that for us, and that is some really, really, in my opinion, cool stuff. Okay, let's look at one more thing. If you go to dev.office.com/fabric, this can get a little confusing, like where do I get started besides sort of what I just showed you. There is a pretty cool getting started link if you want to learn how to get started, and they sort of talk about how to use it. So if you want to use just the core styles, that's the CSS component of it. If you want to use it combined with React, you can go to the React area, or if you want to learn about Fabric.js, you can go there. The catch to React and Fabric.js, Microsoft seems to be putting all of their attention behind Fabric React for their interactions. Fabric.js has fallen a little behind, and their demos aren't exactly as good. They're supposed to be basically one-for-one replacements of each other. I would prefer to see you move to Fabric React, but if you aren't, that's okay. You could stick with core styles, and you can stick with Fabric.js, and you'll probably be okay. But if you go ahead and kind of scroll on down, they'll give you information on how to actually use all this cool stuff. And they actually give you a really good demo here, which we'll go over in a little bit, on how you might use the styles available to us. Now, there is one other thing that we can look at, which is if you want to learn how to use all the styles, if you click on styles and then you click on, say, colors, they're going to show you how to go ahead and grab these different colors that are available to you, and they have a whole implementation process on how to do that. They talk about how to use specific color palettes. Now, let's go ahead and say, let's look at layout. Let's say we want to use a grid. They provide you the HTML structure on how to create this grid in HTML so that you can actually get this component without having to think about through all the CSS necessary, or maybe even the JavaScript necessary to help you get a responsive fluid grid. Okay, so that's kind of like the quick little intro. I mean, it wasn't much, but because I want to show it to you really in SharePoint, which we're going to get into in just a little bit. Let's go ahead and go back to our slide deck. So let's kind of dig back into the different flavors. Now, I've talked about them, but let's sort of hit them again because it's important to get these different flavors. And I have found that people, they get intimidated by the Fabric UI site because they just don't know what to do. The core styles, again, it's all about your icons, your colors, your grid, anything that's just CSS related, just style related. You create a div structure, you create your HTML elements, and if you provide certain classes, you're going to get those specific styles, such as typography or icons or your grid. Okay, I would prefer you move on a little bit and you look at using Fabric React, which is Fabric effectively set up, but within the Fabric framework. So if you want to have buttons, if you want to have call-out panels, people cards, larger structures that might need a little JavaScript behind it as well, that's where Fabric React comes in. Now you're going to build Fabric controls using what's called JSX or TXX. It's a XML formatting kind of JavaScript XML formatting technique, which we actually saw in the previous demo, but I sort of skipped over it. But that's kind of that next piece that you might be using. If you don't want to use React, you can use styles and you can use Fabric.js, which is basically the same components you'd get in React, but you'll just use raw HTML and then the div structure and the class structure to get your elements to interact the way you want, such as a panel. You would create a panel, you create a div for your panel, you'd give it the specific classes that were given to you in the getting started area of the dev.office.com/fabric. You would then, and then you need to wire up a little bit of JavaScript. So if you clicked a button, you would go ahead and say, okay, panel, you now need to appear. You need to get created and you need to do something, and that would then work. And lastly, again, that community-driven project. A lot of you are out, a lot of you devs are using Angular, no problem. AngularJS does have an integrated solution with Fabric, but it is community-driven, so it's typically a little behind. But at the same time, it means you have easier access to contribute if you wanted to. So again, those are like the four main pillars. The top three of the big ones I want you to know about. When you go to the dev.office.com/fabric, just try to remember styles, React, JavaScript, that being the design. If you went ahead and you wanted the components in React, you could, or if you didn't want components and you wanted just raw JavaScript, you have that. Okay. Let's go into a little more detail of our styles. So the styles available to us are those colors and the icons. Those are probably what you're going to use the most. You've got layout, which is the grid we talked about. You also have localization. So if you need to have your site in languages that are right to left, such as Arabic, you can actually set a style which tells everything, hey, switch sides so that you're a right to left instead of left to right. Styles are pretty cool and simple. Really easy to use. You're going to use it again probably for colors and icons and layout. That's typically where I use it the most. The typography, you set that once and it kind of works. What this looks like is, say you wanted to use an icon. Well, if you want to use an icon, you would set up a little structure and then you would say, okay, well, I want a specific class. And now these class names are very important. One of the classes is that you're an MS icon. So that's a UI Fabric class that's been defined for us that says this is going to be an icon. This div, this container, this in this case in italics, but this HTML container is an icon. That's important. The next thing is, well, what icon? Well, it's the ms-icon mail. So it's going to be a little piece of mail. So it's like a mail icon. Now, where do you get these icons from? That's easy. You go back to dev.office.com/fabric. You're going to go to the components or to the styles. You're going to see icons, and they list all the icons out there so you can see what's available, and you can get the name that you need on the second class after the hyphen hyphen. Okay, we saw a grid for layout. You can kind of see here. You set up the div structure, then you give it the proper classes such as MSGrid, MSGridRow, MSGrid column, and then you tell it what level of what type of column do you want it to be, how wide do you want it to be at different viewports. Any of you who've worked with any responsive grid, this should look very familiar to you. And if you're already using Bootstrap or some other one and you want to use that, that's fine. I would suggest you use Fabric if you're going to be using Fabric at all, just because it's already been downloaded and you don't have to ask your users, their browsers, to download yet another another framework. So just something to use. And the last thing, something like animation. So let's say that we want to have a content that's going to slide in from the right. So there's a way to do that. You give your container a class. In this case, it'd be like MSU slide right in 10. And that has been defined in a certain way. And again, get your documentation over at dev.office.com/fabric. And you can learn about how it's going to work. They have demos of what it's going to look like when you use that class. How's that container structure going to get styled, and how's it going to be animated when it appears? So those are three quick examples of using the styles. Effectively, you're setting classes to HTML structures. Pretty simple. Now the JavaScript interactions, which are very similar to the React actions as well, you can see there's a whole bunch of things that you set up. This allows you to create panels and dialogues, callouts. Those are going to be probably your most popular ones, and so much more, like your people pickers, your persona cards. They allow you to create quick overlays, a drop-down menu. Say you want to create a face pile, no problem. You set up the structure according to the documentation of your HTML, and they give you pretty good documentation on it. And you don't have to think about the styling of how you'd actually make that panel look the way it is and make it float in from the right. Let's look at an example for the breadcrumbs. So I showed you the breadcrumbs and what that looked like. So this HTML structure you see is provided for you in documentation at dev.office.com/fabric. You would give a container of the MS breadcrumb, a large container, and then you would tell it, okay, well, here's what I want to have in the overflow, and here's what I want to have in the list. And you basically just set up all of these different containers, these HTML containers, giving it specific classes. Now you may find that your React controls and maybe even your JavaScript will have to dynamically build this. No problem. As long as you are building this structure in the way that the documentation requires you with the classes and whatnot, Fabric takes care of all the styling for you. So that when this gets rendered, what you would be saying is, okay, hey, look, I've got this new breadcrumb structure. Go find it. It's now breadcrumb. I'm going to use the Fabric breadcrumb on the structure, and Fabric goes and takes care of all the magic needed to take this div with the class of MS breadcrumb and turn it into that interaction that you saw that in the first demo. Pretty cool. HTML is easy. This is the JavaScript, although I'm sure a lot of you can do the JavaScript. Okay, fine. So this breadcrumb would take you 2 to 4, maybe 8 hours to get right. It's already been done for you. You just create the structure, a couple lines of JavaScript. It now looks just like the rest of Office 365 and SharePoint. I think pretty cool. All right. So I hope I've convinced you a little bit that you want to move down this route. So I think now we need to think about, okay, how are we going to use Fabric now in our next project? A couple ways to do it. The easiest way to do it, especially in pre-existing projects that you've got going on, if you're using on-prem SharePoint, or even if you just want to use Fabric on a non-SharePoint site or non-Office component, you can link to the different component files provided for us. The top one is your first one that you need. And this is coming from a public CDN that Microsoft maintains, so you don't even have to download this or include it as part of your implementation. You just create the link to the fabric.min.css, and you've now got all of the styles you need. So if you want to do colors and layout and whatnot, easy. Just link to that fabric.min.css, and you can start using those classes, and you start getting the styles. Now let's say, though, that you want to use the components, such as panels or whatnot. You need to do 2 more things. You need to link to one more CSS file. That's the fabric.components.min.css. So that gives you the extra styling. So it's kind of nice. Fabric separates these 2 CSS files for us in case you don't need it. That way your users don't download too much. You also need to link to the JavaScript necessary, which is the fabric.min.js. 3 files. Now you could download those 3 files and then put them onto your, say, your SharePoint site and then link to your own local versions of it. Totally fine and totally doable. We're going to see later on you can actually download all of the source if you wanted. You could recompile all of that and tweak it and change it. You could then link to those files. You could even put together the fabric.min.css and fabric.components.min.css. You could put that into one CSS file if you wanted. You could strip out what you didn't need. Let's say you only needed the grid and you didn't care about the rest. You could do that. I don't really recommend it, but you definitely could. So you could link directly to the CSS and JavaScript. That's your first option. The second option is if you're using Node.js, you can just use Node. You can use Npm to install the Office UI Fabric, the Fabric.js, Fabric React, etc. And then you just use it in your source. You just link to it in your source. And that's how SharePoint Framework works, although SharePoint Framework already did the whole Npm install for you. You don't have to think about that. It's already there. You just use it. But you can just use Node.js to quickly include UI Fabric in your project, and that is how the getting started within on dev.office.com/fabric. That's kind of their preferred method, and that's how they're showing it. And I already alluded to sort of the third method, which is, to me, a combination of the first 2, sort of. You can download the original source. Again, this is open source. You've got all of the source. You can completely touch it, tweak it, change it, destroy it to your own needs. And so I've provided the 3 GitHub projects where you can go and clone those different projects if you wanted. And what's the value of this? Well, to me, the value is twofold. One is, again, you can remove the components you may not want. So let's say you know you're not using components. By downloading the source, you could just remove them from the project, update your gulp or your grunt or your webpack, however you're compiling your stuff, you can go ahead and just link to that which you need. The catch to that is that if an update is made to Fabric, which Microsoft does make a lot of updates to it, it'll be much more difficult for you to include that in updates in your project. That shouldn't be a deal killer, but it's definitely something to think about. Now, I personally, though, I do like downloading the source. I feel like I've shrink-wrapped everything just a little bit better. I know that I'm getting the version that I need, and it works for the project that I'm working on, and any issues I found I have fixed and I've either made a pull request to try to get it included into the original source that Microsoft maintains, or I just go ahead and leave it for my own project, for my own client, and we use our customized version of it. So getting Fabric is really easy. Link to the CDN source, you've got it, boom, you can start using it right away. Or if you want, you could download the source or include it directly in your Node.js project if that's what you choose. So that's like super easy. Well, but if you're using SharePoint, there's ways that are better than others in order to include it directly into your SharePoint projects. So easy ways to just talk about that we've already mentioned is getting the source and just including it direct in your project. I mean, totally no reason why you can't do that. You normally would then have to update your master page if you're going to be using it, and that could be pretty not ideal. Microsoft is definitely saying we should not be touching our master pages. That's not to say you shouldn't ever customize your master pages, but it's something definitely to think about. If you're going to be using Fabric for a custom web part or a control or something, that can get a little more tricky, because if you're going to link to Fabric and you're going to link to, and there might be someone else also linking to another version of Fabric, you might be jumping on top of each other. There is a way with the source code to scope your specific implementation of Fabric, so you might want to consider doing that. But let's just say you're using generic Fabric. You could update the master page. A more preferred method is to use something like alternative CSS and JavaScript embed. That's actually how we're going to go through the rest of our demos. We're going to use PNP and PowerShell to set alternative CSS and use JavaScript embed to inject our JavaScript directly into our pages when we need it. It does work reasonably well. You could also use the feature framework as well. There's no reason why you couldn't, so that you could just activate a feature that will somehow inject CSS and JavaScript. As I talked about, like custom web parts, you could just link to it, but you typically want to scope it. I really hope, though, moving forward, you're going to be making your customizations using modern SharePoint, in particular the SharePoint framework, which you don't have to do a thing, which is so beautiful. Already included, already integrated, you just start using it. You don't have to worry about any of the installation methodologies. So pretty easy. You need to get your SharePoint site or customizations to somehow link to the JavaScript and CSS files that you need, or if you're in the framework, you're good to go. It's already working for you. Okay, so let's go ahead.
Hey, Eric, we had a couple of questions come in.
Sure.
One of them I really catch you on really quick.
Yeah.
Someone asked, can they use this in SharePoint Foundation 2013?
Absolutely. So the issue there on Foundation 2013 would be, how are you going to include the links to the CSS and JavaScript? And you can use PNP, a feature framework, to inject that stuff, to use alternative CSS and inject, but you're going to have to do it through PowerShell or through the feature framework in Visual Studio. Or, since it is on-prem, I have less hesitation editing the master page because you control it now. You can create and customize master pages on-prem with more long-term support, shall we say, because again, you control the interface. You could use this in SharePoint 2010 as well, by the way. There's nothing really holding you back. You could use it in 2007 if you wanted. It's just going to be a little more challenging, I suppose. But the styles themselves are all independent of SharePoint. It just looks like SharePoint.
Awesome, awesome. And then we had one more question, and we might be jumping a little too far back here, but a question came in asking what was the difference between React.js and Fabric.js?
So React.js is not, it's not React.js. It's just React. It's just UI React. If I said JS at the end, I made a mistake there. It's the Fabric.js is the JavaScript versioning for the components, whereas Fabric React is the components already pre-implemented into React. So if you're using React, you don't need to go link off to the JavaScript component because React is already doing that for you. That one's a little complex. I think we'll see it in some future demos here in a little bit.
So I was going to add into that. They did clarify. They wanted to know the difference between Facebook React.js and Microsoft Fabric.js. Tie in
okay,
question.
So yeah, completely different. Facebook maintains React. React is a library for creating interfaces on the web, period. So it's completely separate. It's a library. It's sort of like Angular. People like to compare it to Angular. It's not exactly the same, but it's similar. It's for creating interfaces on top of the web, period. The Fabric React is the Fabric UI components integrated with React already. So they're two very separate things. It's just the Fabric has already been integrated with React, which is an open source library for creating interfaces, period, whereas Fabric is for creating interfaces that look like Office 365. I mean, I'll cut to the chase. That's really what Fabric is trying to do.
Sure. And then there was the last thing, and then we'll let you go on, I promise, is are there any visual examples of this in action? I think that's referring to the Fabric React stuff we were just talking about.
There are at dev.office.com/fabric. So in this next demo here, let me show you that, and then I'm going to dig into my demos, which do show it in action as well. I think to the degree that that you're asking, not really, but the demos do sort of show this in action. The demos that Microsoft provides, and then my demos show it integrated with SharePoint. It's just you'd have to download my source and put it on a dev tenant and kind of see it working. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and kind of like quickly show one of those demos then. So let's go ahead and go back to let's go back to Fabric. Let's go to Components, and let's go ahead and let's look at a callout. So this is their documentation. This is their demo. So they talk about like an overview. They have best practices on how to use this, and then they go ahead and show code. So let's say you want to have a simple callout and you want to see the code. They would show you what you would need to do to actually build this. Now this is the React version, not the JavaScript. But of course, you want to see what does this look like. Well, if you click on callout, you can see what the callout looks like. So that's sort of like the demo of any component that you've got. So here's a nested callout where you can have buttons within a callout. So if you like what's here, let's try another one here, show callout. So you can see that I'm covering the target. So they give you these different demos, and then to get the code, you say show code, and they would show you how they built that specific version of this specific control, that be a component, that being the callout. I think another cool one that I'm going to use is going to be the panel. Okay, so let's look at the panel, and let's go ahead and open the panel, and we'll see what happens. So a panel appeared. Now, if you wanted to create a panel like this, you can show the code, and it would show you how to do this using React. So that's the best examples I can provide is the examples that they provide. Now, let's say you didn't want to use React, you'll oftentimes see in this. So again, this is some biggies here. Office.com/fabric. I clicked on components. I clicked on panel, and at the upper right it says also available in Fabric.js. So if I click on Fabric.js, once this loads, I'll see similar examples on how to put this together. So that if I click on Open Panel, I get the same kind of panel, although don't worry about that for now. If you look at code, they show you how this code was built using no React, using HTML and using JavaScript. So these are the best demos that I can provide that's publicly available to everybody. Okay, what I want to do is show you a few other little demos though, and see what we can do here with everything else we got going on, the tool chain. Okay, so in my code, what I'm going to do, and I've already done a bunch of this, but I'm going to go ahead and switch to my to folder. I'm not going to run this command because it's basically going to, I can run it for you. Let's go ahead and play a little dangerously. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and go to the to folder, and I'm going to npm install. Oops, didn't copy over. I don't know why it didn't copy over. Let's copy that again. Let's go ahead and paste. There we go. So I want to include UI Fabric in my project. I'm using Node.js. So I showed you the npm/save install, and I want to install these 3 different components. Now what's going to happen now is npm is going to go out and check to see, do I have all of these packages, these Node packages installed, which it's going to find them all, so no big deal. It's just going to go ahead and work. While that's working through, let's go ahead and go back to the code that I have to see what we're going to try to do next. Okay. I'm going to go look at some code because I want to kind of see what's happening next here, because this is still thinking, and I'll show you when it's done. Let's go ahead and close this. Let's go to my to folder. Again, you've got access to all of this fun code. Okay, what am I going to do in this installation? What I want to do, I've already created, this is a SharePoint online site. Should look pretty interesting. I have a bunch of basically HTML here. Like, things aren't styled at all. It's just weird, weird looking. This is a content editor web part linking to an HTML file with no CSS or JavaScript, no fabric yet applied. Okay, so what I'm going to do, if you could run this code as well, I'm going to upload this this file that has the HTML structure you just saw. So you can see I've already provided this like MS Grid row, and the columns into the HTML that we just saw. So the text we just saw has this. And you can see I have a panel as well, an MS panel defined, but it showed up. It just appeared in the site, like, here's my panel. Well, no styling is being applied. No fabric is being applied because I haven't installed it yet. I haven't done anything yet. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's look at how I'm putting this whole thing together. I'm using Gulp. So this is how I'm using my tool chain here, and what I'm doing is I am going to concatenate, not much. I'm going to take all of the JavaScript I need, and all I need is fabric.js from my UI Fabric JS module that is being installed for me right now, and I'm going to compile that down, transpile it down to a custom.js file. So effectively I'm creating, this is me including Fabric UI into my tool chain, although it's a very simplistic tool chain, so that I can have Fabric using my own standard development model. Any of you using framework, this should look really, really familiar to you. Those of you, this is a little too complex for you, no worries. All you really need to do, again, is link to your JavaScript, link to the CSS provided by the Fabric, and you can turn this kind of HTML into something new and something cool. So what I'm going to do using PNP is I'm going to provision a file. What really matters here is I am going to set my alternative CSS to that custom CSS file, which is going to be basically just compiled up Fabric UI CSS. I'm compiling the Sass and the CSS. And then I'm also going to, using PNP, I'm going to set a JavaScript embed. I'm going to link my site to my Fabric UI JavaScript. I'm going to upload 2 files, CSS and JavaScript from the Fabric, and then I'm going to link to them. Pretty easy stuff. Now what happened here is it's all just running, all beautifully. I was able to do my npm install and it worked. So I'm going to go ahead and run gulp serve. This is all using Node. So effectively I'm just setting up a little bit of a dev environment to make things a little easier on me. So now the last thing I need to do here is I need to go ahead and using, whoops, I didn't want to do that. Bummer. That's going to get a little crazy. And unfortunately, I just blew out that system, so I'm going to have to go ahead and restart PowerShell. I hit the wrong button, and basically I just ran all of the shell instead of just the one file that I wanted to run. So no worries here. We're going to go ahead and start over here. We just need to go to this folder. We need to get my credentials. Nobody look at my password. We're going to go to the second folder. I can go to 2-. Okay, I need to go to solutions. And now I can provision the CSS. Effectively, all this line really matters is that I want to go ahead and tell SharePoint to upload my JavaScript and CSS, basically Fabric. So I'm not linking to a CDN. because I'm including this in my normal development environment. I am uploading the JavaScript and CSS necessary for Fabric to work. And then I'm saying to SharePoint, hey, go ahead and use the CSS, tell the browser to load the CSS, and go ahead and tell the browser to also load the JavaScript necessary and execute the JavaScript necessary for Fabric to work. So that's all we're seeing happen down here with PMP, is it's doing that magic for us. And again, if you would love to see how we're doing what I just did, go look. I believe it was our April 2017 webinar. If not, you'll go to our webinars in YouTube and you'll find a whole hour on using PNP to provision into SharePoint. Really cool stuff. You don't have to do that this way. This is just the way I prefer. Okay, now if everything went well, if I refresh, this should look different. Okay, not bad. So I have a responsive grid now. So let's go ahead and sort of change the size of this. You can see my grid changed. It's not perfect, but it definitely has a better grid structure. And now there's no panel down here. That panel is hidden, right? There was all that stuff beneath it. So if I go ahead and click on Open Panel, you can see a cool panel appears with styling where I've got different options. And then I've also got a people card, a person card. Not bad. I mean, I didn't have to do any of that JavaScript or CSS. All I had to do was set up this HTML structure according to how Fabric told me to do it. This is commented out, so you can ignore that, but you could also link to CDN if you wanted. I set up a panel the way that the HTML told me to do it in dev.office.com/fabric, and it automatically worked for me. It totally made the styling look all cool. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and disable that because in order to move on, I need to turn the branding off to make it look cool. Okay, so that's kind of how you would include Fabric into your toolchain. I'm going to repeat this because it's important. All you need to do is link to your CSS that Fabric provides, link to the JavaScript Fabric provides if you want those interactions, those components such as the panel and the dialog, etc. You create the HTML structure for the components as described at dev.office.com/fabric. So when you're getting started with this, you're going to be living at dev.office.com/fabric all the time, because it's not exactly intuitive how to create a people card. You need to set up your HTML structure to match what they have with their classes and all that stuff. And they're not intuitive. You have to go get the class names, and the best place to get them is at dev.office.com/fabric. That's really it. Okay, so now let's look at Fabric React. So there's a question sort of like, well, what's the difference between React that comes from from Facebook and Fabric React that comes from Microsoft? They're completely separate ideas. Fabric, maintained by Facebook, again, is the library that provides us this way to build an interface in general. Fabric React is just Fabric pre-combined with React. So React is still there at its base. We still use all of the React methodologies to use the library provided. It's just that we can predefine we have predefined abilities to create the components of that Fabric provides for us. Okay. The keys to that, because I've talked about this quite a lot, is that if you're going to be using the SharePoint framework, you're going to be building new components or custom components for SharePoint moving forward, you really want to use SharePoint framework. Now, if you're on 2013, you're never going to get it. You're out of luck on that one. If you're on SharePoint 2016, they say the framework is coming to you sometime by the end of the calendar year, is what I've heard, in Feature Pack 2. But if you're on SharePoint Online, you can already use SharePoint framework. It is in GA. It's already pre-included, so you can use Office UI Fabric React. It's already there for you. A key component here is that this is, again, I've said this once, and I want to make sure I say it again because it is important. The Microsoft team appears to be putting their effort into Fabric React instead of Fabric JS. They really want us all moving to React for our components. So styling, that's still there. The core of Fabric, our styling, that hasn't changed. That's going to be your div structures, basically your classes. But if you want the cool components such as callouts and panels and people cards, it is better to use React if possible than trying to use JavaScript. So let's go ahead and let's look at that. The way we're going to do this is we're going to now switch over to the SharePoint framework. It's a little easier for me to show a little quicker, but at the same time, you'll still have, you should still be able to get enough out of this so that you could build this in your own environment if you so chose to. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's look at my source code. This is a SharePoint framework web part. I have done nothing too special here. But again, you can download this, you can get this web part, and anybody on this call can get the framework working today in the local environment the way I'm going to do it. You don't even need SharePoint to do this, and you could see all of this interaction already occurring for you. Okay, so I'm going to go to the React demo webpart.ts file, and what I care about is that I am building a specific component, a React element. That React element is my React demo component. So let's go look at the React demo component because that's where it matters. If you look up here at the top, you're not going to see anything Fabric related. There's no import of Fabric because I'm not using it in this particular file. Let's go ahead and instead look at my React demo TSX file, and let's see what's going on here. One of the first things I do is I need to tell this particular TSX file that I do want to use Fabric here. And I tell it what it is that I want. I want to use the dialog type, dialog footer, button type, choice group. These all come from UI Fabric React. Now, where did I get all this from? I got these names directly from dev.office.com/fabric. That's where I learned what it was that I can import from Office UI Fabric React so that I could use these controls. So if we go ahead and we scroll on down and we look at the element that I was creating, we can start to see, hopefully, starting to recognize something, some of the classes from core, such as MS Grid, and some of the names of the components from Fabric React. So here's a button. This is a Fabric React button. It looks like I'm going to have a dialog here as well, so Fabric React. And again, I got all this code directly from dev.office.com/fabric. And if we scroll down, we'll then see back to core, and this isn't really React here, this is just using Fabric UI core because I'm providing my classes to provide content in a grid structure. That's really it. Pretty simple. So what am I doing again? In order to use Fabric React, I need to tell my specific TSX files what is it that I want to use on this specific file. I want to use, say, a dialog and a button. I'm pulling that in from Fabric React, and then within my render function of my React element, or React component if I was using that instead, I can then use a combination of general styles from core and UI Fabric React components such as buttons, dialogs, panels. And you can get examples for all of this at dev.office.com/framework/fabric. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's look at what this is going to look like in practice. Okay, so I need to go to my third file, and I'm going to do gulp serve. This is SharePoint Framework. I believe last month, so that would have been May 2017, we did an intro to the SharePoint Framework. So if you want a whole hour on how to use the framework and how to get started with it, that is definitely going to be your go-to place so that you can get a better idea of what it is I did if you're new to the framework. Effectively, though, I just created a simple framework example. I changed a component around a little bit, and I'm using the React framework. But one thing I didn't have to do, an important thing I didn't have to do, was nowhere in this code did I have to say, go download Office Fabric. I didn't have to tell it how to do anything. That's all included for me because the framework took care of it. If you're using Node, most of that would be handled for you as well. You could just use the components. You don't have to worry about really bundling it up. So kind of cool. Okay, let's go look at my demo. So what happened here is, let's go ahead and move this to the other window. It's a little cleaner. What's happening with the framework is it's opening up a local host, and under this local host I can go and add my web part, my React demo web part, and you can see that those 4 columns of text that I had that are using the responsive framework, and if I click on open dialog, I get a cool dialog that appeared for me with the different buttons and such included with it. I didn't have to worry about any of the styling, none of it, right? It just worked. So I clicked on open dialog, I didn't have to think, how am I going to get this overlay? How am I going to center this and build this box? How do I make these buttons look the way they do? How do I make it so that option C would be disabled and what a disabled button would look like, or a disabled radio box would look like? I don't have to worry about the topography of these different elements. All of that is handled for us by just saying we would like to use the dialog. We have a title that we want to have. We have subtext we want to use. We want to create a choice group. We've got our different keys and values and whatnot, and all of that styling is handled for us. Pretty cool. Now, I've only got 5 minutes before we go really to that Q&A. I might go over just a little bit to move on to the last little thing I want to show, which is making UI Fabric your own. So if you want to customize Fabric, you totally can. Since UI Fabric is built on open source tooling, which is particular Node.js and Gulp, you can download the source and then add your own styles and your own components. You can customize the styles they give you. You can customize the components they give you. No problem. I wouldn't necessarily change what they gave you. Rather, I would add new ones. So let's say you've got a dialog and you don't like the way they did it. You want to add more functionality. You can create your own dialog component. Maybe it's called dialog custom. You can then tweak it to do whatever it is you want, and you can have some fun with that. So that's exactly what I want to do in this next demo. I'm going to go ahead and stop this. I'm going to go look at my code to see what I care about here. Okay. This one is going to get a little more fun, but it's going to be okay. Hang with me here. I know this is good. There's a lot of code here. Okay, so what I have done in this example is I have my source folder. Within my source folder, I have downloaded the source for the Fabric.js project. So this is not Fabric Core, this is not Fabric React, this is JavaScript. Okay, that's the way it goes. Within the source that's provided for me, there's another source folder, and within the source folder, there's a components folder. Within the components folder, there are all the different components that are available to us. This is what they give us. And each component effectively consists of a TypeScript file, some Sass, and then normally JSON and handlebars. But let's kind of ignore that and let's just focus on the TypeScript and the CSS, the Sass file. What I did was I took dialog, I copied and pasted the whole folder, and I created dialog custom. Within dialog custom, I went ahead and I updated the TypeScript. I named it dialog custom, and I changed some things. One of the things I wanted to do, and I know I have a lot of commented code here because I wanted to be able to have a debugging code that you could see, including some console logs. One of the things I wanted to do is I want my dialog to always be at least 80% wide of the width of the screen. So I want my dialog to be really wide. Dialogs in Fabric, by the way, are fixed to like 200 some pixels. They're narrow on purpose. I want my own special dialog. So I took the TypeScript given to me in dialog. I just copied and pasted dialog folder to dialog custom, and I didn't have to do anything else. The way that Fabric UI is set up, the JavaScript is set up in this project, it does all of the work for me to find out that, oh, hey, look, I have a new dialog custom. And it compiles everything for me, and it creates a new JavaScript file for me that I can then link to in my source. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's make all this stuff work. I need to do a couple things here. I need to go to .4. And now I need to go to the, I need to actually get into the folder of where that is being held, which is this source/office, so I can do that. Okay, so I'll get to it and then I'll tell you what it is I'm doing here. Okay, so here's my source folder for Office UI Fabric React. So I downloaded the source from Git. I put it in the source folder. Now I need to go ahead and tell it, hey, you need to go build yourself. You know, go build the customizations and go make sure that you recompile all my JavaScript. In particular, I want you to go grab that dialog, custom that I created. Okay, while that's happening, I need to move on in interest in time. I'm going to go ahead and run this installation here in a second. I'm going to reset the code that you see here, not here, here. Now if I refresh this, the styling should go away. Yeah, it did, which is perfect. And remember, it says open panel. It's going to change to say open dialog here in a second. Okay, so how am I doing here? You can ignore the errors that just went by. That's just some coding that I didn't really care about. Okay, so it went ahead and it built itself. So now what I need to do is go ahead and go back to the root of my project. So the JavaScript and CSS necessary for Office UI Fabric JS has just been rebuilt for us with my customizations. I now need to go ahead and say, okay, great, go rebuild our overall project code to include the CSS and JavaScript we just compiled over in Office UI Fabric JS Master. Does that make sense? So we created our own version of Office UI Fabric JS. We are now recreating our project to link to the to include those files and any additional CSS or JavaScript our overall project may need. Okay, so I now need to go to the that folder. And let's go to the solutions folder. Okay, solution, perfect. Now I can go ahead and install this. So what am I doing here while this is happening? I updated my version of the open source UI Fabric JS project with my own customizations. That recreated a JavaScript and CSS file, so I no longer would want to link to the CDN or anything. I then recreated my overall project, because maybe my project has more CSS and JavaScript for my own reason. Like I did my project needs more stuff. I recompiled that, and now through PnP, I'm pushing all that up into SharePoint, and I'm telling SharePoint, use this new JavaScript CSS that includes my customized version of Fabric React. And what should happen? One of the things that was included in this code is an updated HTML file here for this. So when I refresh this, what should happen, I believe, is it should say Open Dialog instead of Open Panel. It does. It says Open Dialog. Now, if you remember before in the other demo I had, the dialog was really small. Now, when I click Open Dialog here, check that out. It's 80%. And if I get smaller and smaller and smaller, what's going to eventually happen is it's not 80%. It's actually going to take up basically the whole, it will take up almost the whole screen. I left a margin in it. So, and you can see here on the right-hand side, I got all those console logs. So not too hard. If you want to update or customize your own Fabric React core, Office UI Fabric, Office UI Fabric React, Office UI Fabric JS, you completely can. You download the source. You're using Node, you just do a Node watch or Npm watch, which is that's how you rebuild, and you're good to go. It's really simple, pretty cool. Okay, let's finish up here with the recommendations, and I'll take any questions. Best way to get started with this is the best way to learn is to just start working with it. I know that in hours, like what was going on. If you use dev.office.com/fabric, you start going through their examples and you just rewatch the pieces of the video where I go into this, you'll get started pretty quick. It's really not that hard. Get started with core first. Get started with the styling. Just get comfortable with creating a grid, using the colors, creating icons. Those are the easy things. Very quick. Then move on to the components. Link to the JavaScript. Link to the React if you're going to go with React, to the React stuff if you're going to go React. And then use the examples at dev.office.com/fabric to figure out how to build a button, how to build a dialog, how to build a call out. Start simple and go from there and start to build more complex examples. Once you get started with the basic, then I would suggest moving to something like React. I think that unless you're already on SPFX, it might be a little easier, but if you get started with just core and maybe even JavaScript, that will make some sense to you to then move on to React. Jumping into React might be a little more challenging. Do watch for the updates because Microsoft is updating Fabric. They appear to be putting some effort behind it, so I would definitely watch it and see if they add new styles and controls. If you do end up customizing Fabric, again, when you grab the latest update, you may need to watch that your updates may get overwritten, so you may just want to have backups ready so that you can go ahead and install the updates and then move your stuff over. Best way, again, to get started is using the examples. And also go look at the examples, in particular the controls that are available. You saw in that demo where I showed you dev.office.com/fabric, and on the left-hand side under components, you could see lots of different controls. Go click on them. Go look at the demos and see what they do and go, oh, that's cool. I can use that because that's a good UI for my customization. I didn't know you could do a panel. I didn't know you could do a dialogue, and I didn't know they had other buttons and stuff. So I think a good way to get to figure it out is just, again, go to the site that they provided, start clicking around and see what's available before you start building your interface. That way, when you start building your interface, if you draw it out, you wireframe it, you can use what you've learned and consider how to contribute to that. So we have a quick review. I'm going to go ahead and I'll leave it at some resources that I have for you. I'll come back to this here in a second because I know a lot of you will want to grab that. I do want to say that if you're listening to this before the end of May of 2017, you can join me at SharePoint Fest Denver 2017. I've got a couple of sessions going on there on development as well as P&B provisioning. So if you did want to learn about that, you can make it out and join me. Hopefully you can join us. And if you get discount codes, I think you should be able to use a discount code Overfield to save a couple $100. I'm going to go ahead and leave it at the resources for you. I'll take some questions, Michael. If there are no questions, I'm going to kind of reiterate a few key takeaways.
Sure. Great session, Eric. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We do have a couple questions that came in throughout the thing, so we'll be jumping back just a little bit.
No problem.
We'll jump back up to a question from Val. Why Microsoft insist on using Bootstrap? Instead of using Bootstrap, create a framework that we need to use. Why do they insist on using Bootstrap? Does that make sense?
I think it's more that why didn't they use Bootstrap, or why did they use their own grid? Because it's not Bootstrap, it is their own grid. I actually have no idea. It's interesting. I would think that they just chose to do it their own way. They chose to do their own grid, their own way. That probably just it was easier for them. They didn't want to copy Bootstrap, I'm sure, straight up, and they only needed the grid. They didn't want the rest of it. Now you can easily strip just the grid out of Bootstrap, but why? Can't tell you. To me, Bootstrap is sort of overblown. I'm the Bootstrap guy, man. That's what I did years ago. Was moving Bootstrap to SharePoint, but so much of Bootstrap is not needed necessarily. The big thing about Bootstrap was just the grid. So now responsive grids are dime a dozen. I have no problem moving to a different grid. I think that what they're doing with Fabric, their grid is just fine. And again, it's what they're using. It's what Microsoft's using. So I would prefer to stick with one framework. If you use Bootstrap and Fabric UI Fabric, I'm not going to blame you. Totally get it. I got it. Yep, no problem.
All right. This next one's kind of a long one, so bear with me while I read through it. It was broken up into two parts, so I'm going to read it as one because it's all connected. This is from Chris Romp. He asks, are these UI elements only, or, for example, can we use the Fabric People Picker to look up and resolve users in SharePoint the way we might use Client People Picker today? And if it is UI only, does MS have on their roadmap some updates to client-side controls like the People Picker to style them consistently with the modern sites / Fabric?
Yeah, I like the question. I'm going to interpret that as, is Fabric UI just the interface, or does it also include the interaction? And it's just the interface. So I showed, like the People Picker, or I showed you the card, the UI card. They only provide the structure for you. You still have to populate the data. You need to go get the data. You need to go get all the elements. And if you had one of the HTML components is like a name would go here, or you put the picture of the person over here. You have to go get that data for UI Fabric to be able to display it. It's just, if you then take, say, the image of the person, and you take that div, that HTML structure for a person's picture, and you surround it in the proper div or the proper HTML with the proper classes, it will then take the picture, it will shrink it down to that right size, and it will round the edges, all for you. And it's just using JavaScript, it's using CSS to do that, excuse me. But you need to populate the data. Is Microsoft going to help us sort of do that? Not the way I think that you would want. At least I haven't seen it on the roadmap. Rather, what I've seen is they're saying, hey, we've got Graph, we've got the Microsoft Graph to go grab lots of kinds of data. We have the REST API for SharePoint to go get lots of kind of data. We will return to you the JSON that will then help you build these controls, shall we, or to be able to populate the data. But you're still going to have to build the React structure, the React XML structure effectively, or the HTML structure using the classes and components found in Fabric UI to get the styling. So the summation of all that is Fabric UI, UI Fabric is just the styling. It does not provide any true interaction with backend data natively. You have to include that yourself.
Awesome. Great answer to that. So we're going to switch to a comment actually that came in. This is a pretty nice comment. I thought you'd appreciate hearing this, Eric. Person says, if you are a SharePoint dev and have very little time, one speaker you should listen to is Eric Overfield.
Ah,
so well done, sir. You're doing something right. Doing something right. Yeah. And then we'll go back, then we'll jump back into questions. Can I apply and turn customization in a site template?
Can I apply customizations in a site template? I don't see why not. Now, I'm assuming we're talking about SharePoint on-prem site templates because SharePoint on-prem, because online doesn't really have that to that degree that we'd want. I don't see why not, as long as your site template, I mean, it needs to include the references to the alternative CSS, the JavaScript, the updated master page. But you can do a lot of that with site templates. You can do that in Visual Studio. You can, as long as you can build a structure, you're okay. Now, if you export a site template, I don't think it would include this natively, but I haven't done that in so long. As long as you can get the, I haven't worked with site templates in so long. As long as you can get those references, you'd be okay. And I couldn't tell you offhand. It's a pretty quick test. Create a site template with a team site or something that you've already done that with, or if you're using Visual Studio to create your site template. Again, as long as the references to the CSS and JavaScript exist, you'll be good to go. If you're using the CDNs, all you need are the references. If you are creating your, if you're hosting your own CSS and JavaScript, your own customized version of UI Fabric, JavaScript, and CSS, you would need to make sure your site template included that, which if you put it in the style library, it should. The site template should include that kind of customization. It at least should include the files.
Great, great. That came in from Danilo, by the way. Thank you, Danilo, for that great question. We got the next one coming in from Martin Sunman. Looks like more of a comment than a question, but let's see. For Office 365, you can, quote unquote, kind of include the branding using the Site Provisioner API. There's an example on the PnP site. And for Site Template, you would need a feature receiver to activate the branding when the site is
Perfect.
made.
Good answer. Let me expand upon that. So using PnP kind of like that I did, you should have no problem setting this all up so that any new site could kind of have a sort of like a site template. Microsoft has made it pretty clear they're working on something they're calling recipes, which are kind of new site templates for 365. For on-prem, as discussed, so good to know that you would need a feature receiver. So you would need to create really a Visual Studio feature that included the activation in C# to activate alternative CSS, to set the alternative CSS, to set the JavaScript embed, or to upload the updated master page, etc. And then using the feature receiver, what that's going to do is anytime a new web is created, your feature receiver would basically staple, you'd be stapling your feature to that, saying, hey, okay, this was activated, now go activate this feature as well. A new web is created, activate this feature. And there's demos on how to do that since 2010, really. So there's lots of, you can Google any of those kind of technologies, and just as long as you upload or link as well, or the particular link to the JavaScript and CSS for Fabric in your feature, you're good to go.
Awesome, awesome. And that brings us to the end for today. We're just about at our time, so thank you everyone for joining us. If you have any follow-up questions, or if you want to just ask us anything, hit us up on Twitter at PixelMill Team, or Eric at Eric Overfield. Check us out, pixelmill.com, ericoverfield.com. We would love to hear from you and chat with you more. And like Eric said, come visit us in Denver. We'll have a booth up as well, and come say hi to Eric, ask him questions, bug him, give him a hug. He likes hugs. And that's it. Anything else from you, Eric?
No, I really appreciate everyone's time. I know this topic can be a little interesting, a lot of different code pieces to go through. And I know I speak pretty quick, but I appreciate everyone joining us today. We are going to get that video up shortly. Just watch it for an email or on Twitter, so that you can always just rewatch and re-listen to the specific component that I might have gone over a little too quick.
All right, and there you go. Have a great day, everyone, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Talk to y'all soon. Bye.